Hello everyone! Welcome back to my Vlogmas. So today I wanted to talk about Nephilims and giants. I have abused this book. Anyway, the Nephilim Chronicles. A really cool title for a series of books. Where to start, I think. Fritz Zimmerman maintains a website and several different books about his great quest for giants. This one is mostly on the American Midwest. He's got another one that does, I think, the whatever side of the country I live on. West Coast? East Coast? Where the hell do I live? Anyway. But he's done books that cover evidence of giants throughout the world, or at least throughout North America. And some of his research was repeated on a little-known show called Search for Lost Giants, which actually probably isn't very well known. It's probably known within the pseudo-archaeology and alternative history crowds, but for the most part, the series, which aired on History Travel, can't remember, it only lasted a season, and it wasn't very many episodes long, which, if you ever watch the series, I hate to be mean, but if you watch the series, it's kind of evident why. It wasn't very entertaining. They didn't have a lot to go on, and the whole premises of the show through the entire season was just kind of not coherent. Jason Colavito does a really good breakdown of each individual episode, and I'll put a link to his, because he's got them all summarized and stuff. I'll put a link to that in the show notes so you can go read them. Fair warning, there's snark involved, but that's just Jason's style, and frankly, I don't think it's misplaced. And yeah, so the show was just not well done. And that's unfortunate, because I think the Vieira brothers, they genuinely seemed like nice, good, friendly people who just happened to believe in giants. The people around them, however, and the show itself did not do them justice. I mean, there's still two dudes who believe in giants and all of the issues that go along with believing in giants. So there's that. But I at no point was watching that show and was like, oh my god, these two are insufferable. However, the rest of the people on the show, oh my god. Like, I don't know how they managed that, but the rest of the cast is just eye-rollingly bad. Anyway, Fritz Zimmerman. We're not actually talking about Fritz. We're talking about giants. We're talking about giants and about how giants have been used to... The idea of giants has definitely evolved over the several hundred years that they have been around in the American imagination. And the reason for that is way back in the day, when white Europeans first came to the Americas and started exploring the interior of the North American continent, they started coming across huge earthworks. We know them now as mounds or effigy mounds. You can go and look at several. They have been preserved. However, probably several thousand were destroyed over the history of the country by farming and just in general disrespect for the site. So we've lost more of them than we have ever preserved as far as American history goes. I have opinions. And when early settlers and early white explorers started finding these earthworks, they wouldn't believe that the currently indigenous, well, I mean, they were always indigenous, Native Americans were capable of even building these things. And so they started creating alternative theories based on nothing to explain why these earthworks existed. And a lot of times based solely on the massive scale of these earthworks, giants were brought into the story. And one of the details of ancient giants building the effigy mounds and the earthworks around the country was that they were white, specifically. An advanced race of white giants. And that had then been displaced or wiped out by the Native Americans that were currently there. This whole story says a lot about European xenophobia, very much their fear of the unknown, their belief in, European superiority. There's a lot going on in just that little tidbit of history. Now, the mound builder myth, which is what the giants, these white giants, usually get wrapped up into. I have a hair on my nose. Not anymore, though. This mound builder myth was actually put to rest fairly early on in it was fairly late in the Victorian era. Yeah, by a guy named Cyrus Thomas. He's the one credited with it. He wrote the definitive report that was sent to the Smithsonian that was basically like, there's no reason to believe that Native Americans didn't build these mounds. And it's not like we were just waiting for Cyrus Thomas to come around. There had been a lot of people who had been examining the mounds, both men and women, I would like to put in there, several women, who were examining the mounds archaeologically and were coming to the same conclusion. Cyrus Thomas was just the person who was charged with writing the report for the Smithsonian that then went on record saying, no, the mounds are Native American in origin, not some imagined European race. So that's why Cyrus Thomas always gets the credit for it. Technically, his name's on the report. That's how these things work in archaeology, unfortunately. We need to change that crap. Anyway, moving forward into today. So, since Cyrus Thomas's time, so like the late Victorian era, serious archaeologists and professional archaeologists assign any mounds or effigies found throughout anywhere really, to whoever the indigenous people of the area were at the time. So if you're finding mounds in Scotland, you're probably attributing those to whoever the people who lived in Scotland at the time were. You wouldn't assume that they were built by someone else. Same thing in America. If we find effigy mounds here, we assume, because we have evidence that supports these assumptions, that these mounds were built by Native Americans and indigenous peoples at the time. So that's just how it is. Anytime these mounds have been examined, anytime they have been excavated archaeologically, evidence points to support this idea. So it's really not up for debate. It's not one of the things we have debates about. It's not like we've ever found a mound in the United States that had something in it that was absolutely weird and could not be explained away. I know a lot of people like to bring up things like the Bat Creek Stone, which supposedly has Hebrew writing on it and blah blah blah, but we've debunked the Bat Creek Stone multiple times on the ArchyFantasies blog and podcast, and those kind of things did pop up a lot during the Victorian era, because that was when the transition was happening from really moving academic thought away from mysterious biblical race of giants to the more realistic and evidence-supported theory of Native Americans and indigenous peoples building the mounds. So there was a lot of pushback to that, actually, because as I stated in, I think day 3, archaeology is political. Archaeology has always been political. It will continue to be political, and it was political in the Victorian era too. And archaeology has been used still is used to kind of bolster nationalism and, you know, ethnic identity. So I mean, I belong to a really interesting field that can be used in a lot of really ugly ways, and Victorian era was rife with that. So today, coming forward to today, and back to Mr. Zimmerman's collection of books and such, do not think that I am attacking Mr. Zimmerman. I'm not. And he is only one out of several people who believe in giants and believe that the mounds themselves are still giant mounds. The interesting twist that has happened in this story is, and it happened recently, like since the 2014, because I believe that's when Search for Lost Giants started being aired. This is when the idea became publicly popular. So up until that point, it usually, if you were hearing things about the lost giant race or the lost race of the mound builders, which does pop up in fringe archaeology frequently, and you'll see it in Ancient Aliens, and you'll see it on pretty much, well, any fringe show likes to go back to the mounds and likes to reassign the mounds to anyone other than Native Americans. The interesting thing that's happened with the giants theory for building the mounds is that the giants have recently morphed from being this lost European race or this lost biblical race into giant Native Americans. And so it's a weird thing, a weird shift that has happened, moving away from... It's really interesting because it's like, I wrote a blog post about how the fringe is aware of racism, and they're aware that there is racism in their ideas. I don't feel like they really understand why their ideas keep getting called racist, but they know it happens, and they know it's bad, and they think it has something to do with skin color. That seems to be the only connections they've made. So instead of continuing to claim that giants were a lost race of white people, they've now decided that giants are a lost race of indigenous Native American peoples. Therefore, it's no longer racist. They still maintain that giants are a separate race from Native Americans. They still maintain that giants predate Native Americans, thereby still making Native Americans not actually native and still not the first people in the Americas. So they're still removing the historical significance of indigenous and native people building the mounds and the other structures that are dotted throughout the continent, and still reassigning that piece of Native American history to this lost, vanished, unknown, unproven, never existed race of people, of giants. Still don't understand why that's racist. But I do think it's an interesting shift that this is how the fringe community is choosing, or the giant fringe community is choosing to handle these claims of racism in their giant theory. And it's also really interesting because and I only recently became aware of this, again, thanks to Jason Colavito. Yes, I stalk him, leave me alone. He was doing a review of a book that I have no intention of reading that was put out by Jim Vieira and Hugh Newman from the show Search for Lost Giants. And I guess one of the 5 preferences, 5 introduction chapters of this book, there's a bit in there where Vine DeLorean is quoted. He gets quoted a lot by the fringe, and that kind of really ticks me off because Vine DeLorean is himself not fringe. He is a well-known Native American author and advocate, and I mean, I don't know the man myself, but I've read several of his pieces, and the way his stuff is taken out of context by the fringe is frankly just ignorant. And yeah, so that's my stance on that. And I mean, whether you love or hate Vine DeLorean, the fact is that he's way taken out of context by the fringe community, and it's frankly just rude. It's basically they've basically made Vine DeLorean like their token Native American, which, again, a whole other topic. Oh my god, so much to get into on one little topic. Anyway, it's interesting that this shift away from the lost white giant race to now the lost native giant race, still not Native Americans, but native to America race of giants, because also in these introductions to Vieira and Newman's book, there's this twisting, and there's this straw man argument that you'll hear a lot about how mainstream archaeologists don't believe XYZ, even though mainstream archaeologists would never tout what are being said. But it kind of twists the story to make it sound like mainstream archaeologists are the ones being racist and not the ones bringing up racism, because they refuse to acknowledge this non-existent giant race as native to the United States, and therefore we're being racist against giants and also Native American people because we don't believe in giants. That one's fun, and I'm not even offended. I'm just kind of really honestly fascinated by that, because it's an interesting shift in the dogma of giant beliefs, and it's an interesting attempt to, my cats are wound up, just FYI. It's an interesting shifting of the blame, I guess, is interesting. Like, you can't call me racist because you are racist. Fun story. Archaeologists are fully aware of racism and archaeological racism, and the fact that there are lots of aspects of our field that are racist. Like, we are very aware of this. It is. Being aware of your biases is the only way to overcome them. Which is, I think, the major difference here, is that archaeology and archaeologists are aware of the issues, we're aware of our problems, we actively attempt to get as far away from them or to rectify them as possible. Pseudo-archaeology's never really done that. They refuse to admit that they're racist, they refuse to admit that anything that they're doing might be racist, they refuse to admit that anything that they've done can be taken as racism, except for this one little situation here. And they're not even blatantly admitting that, oh hey, maybe there's some racist elements to our old giant theory, maybe we should attempt to rectify them. They just kind of ignore the fact that the old giant theories were blatantly racist, and then try to make them non-racist as if the racism of the past never existed. And I mean, it's an attempt. It's an attempt. And I find that fascinating, because it's the only time, with the exception of Graham Hancock, it is the only time that I have seen the fringe attempt to clean up a fringe theory. And we'll get to Graham Hancock in another video, because he also does a very similar thing, which kind of makes me wonder if Newman and Vieira didn't pick this up from Hancock doing it, because I'm not sure which one of them did it first. So one of them is mimicking the other. I just don't know which yet. And I'm saying mimicking, it's not plagiarism, it's just mimicking, but it's interesting to see how this idea is trickling down through fringe theories. And so it will also be interesting to see how many other fringe theories try to distance themselves from basically racist roots without addressing the racist roots, and just trying to claim that they are not racist and you should believe them without evidence, because that's how every one of their theories is based. Anyway, I think that's more than enough of me rambling about giants and racism, and I will see you guys in episode... Ooh, this was Vlogmas Day 6? Yes. So I will see you all in Vlogmas episode 7.